end the Bretton Woods system on August 15th, 1971, which ended fixed exchange rates by severing the relationship of the dollar to gold. So we would go back to the pre-71 gold reserve system. But then you use that system as a basis of generating credit for production. Now, the problem comes in there, as you said, well, how can we trust the Congress? Well, at this point, we can't trust the Congress or the people of the United States because we were seduced by the idea of quick money and quick buck speculation. I mean, anytime there's a bubble, there's a neurotic psychological reaction in the whole population that, me too, I've got to get in on the bubble. And that's why a lot of people who should have known better started buying new houses or refinancing their homes in the last decade, only to see that, yes, it was a bubble and no one's going to buy your house at $500,000 if it used to be worth $200,000. So I think the starting point is leadership around the principles of the Constitution. And the only thing, Sean, I can tell you that gives us a chance of doing that now is that we're about to have the most devastating collapse in world history of the whole global financial system. The euro is probably not going to survive the summer. They may come up, stitch together another agreement in somewhere in Europe. But what's going to happen right after that is there'll be a day of euphoria, the markets will go up, and then they'll realize that someone's got to come up with some money to back up the bailouts. And there's no place to turn except Germany or maybe Russia and China, and the Russians and the Chinese won't do it. And even the Germans are balking. If the euro goes, how long do you think it will take for the margin calls on the London-based offices of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, and so on?
A matter of days or weeks at best.
Yeah.
It's horrifying. And I know that you're headed to Europe here in short order on behalf of the LaRouche organization, so I want you to tell people why you're going and what you hope to accomplish. But before we do that, let me ask you this about re-implementing Glass-Steagall. They put it into place after, the Great Depression, right? After the Wall Street run? One of
the first acts of Franklin Roosevelt was Glass-Steagall. And it was actually a bill that had been drafted before that by two congressmen, one senator and a congressman. The idea was that what happened during the 20s is that as the speculative bubble expanded, commercial banks were able to take deposits of their customers and use that for speculation. Mm-hmm. And there was no FDIC, there was no deposit insurance, and so when the banks went belly up, people lost their life savings.
Right.
There was very little regulation of the stock market. And so what Roosevelt did was bring in the SEC, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to at least make sure we knew who people were handing their money over to for investments, and that there would be some rules as to what they could invest in.
Sure. But here's my question, Harley. Glass-Steagall re-implemented tomorrow, but under whose regulation and enforcement? Since everything is corrupt now, who is going to possibly follow the rules or enforce them in this current paradigm? I mean, the paradigm almost seems like it's beyond repair, and it must collapse in order for us to begin anew. Or do you really truly think we have a chance of turning this thing around?
Let me present it from the negative side. If we don't get Glass-Steagall, when this crash occurs, it's going to wipe everything out because the FDIC does not have enough money to protect people's deposits, their savings, their 401ks, and so on. So if we don't do something to stop this, we're going to lose everything. Now, the other side of it is that Glass-Steagall, if it does nothing else, would be to stop the bailouts. It would mean that if J.P. Morgan Chase makes a bad bet, that they would have to eat the loss. They couldn't pass it on to their customers or to their stockholders or to the federal government. The principle of Glass-Steagall is that these large, too-big-to-fail banks would be forced to decide if they want to be speculators or responsible citizens of communities, the way bankers usually are. I mean, usually, when you talk about corruption, the experience from 1933 to 1999, with the exception of the savings and loan crisis, which was partly a result of the two deregulation bills in 1980 and 82, most of the time bankers in small towns and in your state of Minnesota and Texas, the bankers tried to make sure that there was credit available to people who were sensible and who had good business models and ideas and were trustworthy. And right now, there's no credit for that. All the credit is tied up to back up these worthless assets. So if you impose Glass-Steagall and you ask who would do it, look, I think there are enough people out there who remember what it was like when we had a regulated banking system, who could be brought in and quickly bring people up to snuff if it were the intent of the Congress to do that. Now, I don't know if you know this, Sean, but there are 69 co-sponsors of a bill to restore Glass-Steagall. It's House Resolution 1489, or HR, House of Representatives 1489, and it includes some Republicans, but 69 people support it. Right now, Paul Volcker, who's a former Federal Reserve Chairman, is contacting those Democrats, telling them, don't go with Glass-Steagall. The Volcker rules are adequate.
The Volcker rules are a joke, correct?
The only reason for the Volcker rules was to keep Glass-Steagall out, because there was a bill that was being brought into Dodd-Frank by Maria Cantwell, a liberal Democratic senator from Washington, and John McCain, the senator from Arizona. They had a Glass-Steagall bill they tried to get Dodd and Frank to include. And it was Geithner personally, through Barney Frank, who's one of the most corrupt individuals who's ever been in the Congress. Those two insisted there'll be no Glass-Steagall, and so it never came to a vote. And instead, they substituted the Volcker rules, which, when Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, says he doesn't like the Volcker rules, that's like Brer Rabbit saying, don't throw me into that briar patch. Right. They love the Volcker rules because there are no rules. There's no change.
Well, all right, so if we don't re-implement Glass-Steagall, the result will be catastrophe. And if we do re-implement Glass-Steagall, at least there's a chance that we could stem catastrophe. Let me ask you this before we let you go. Ron Paul says many of the same things you and I have just been speaking about. I know you have a personal past history with him to some extent. Why don't you guys support Ron Paul? Given these three candidates that we're down to, essentially, two puppets and Ron Paul, wouldn't it make sense for your organization to get behind Ron Paul?
Well, there are certain aspects of what Ron Paul has been fighting for years that we do agree with. His opposition to these imperial wars, where he's very principled and very committed to that. His initial impulse to dismantle the Federal Reserve. I think auditing the Federal Reserve is a bad compromise. It's already been audited. It doesn't represent anything. But his anti-Federal Reserve stance I would support. But this is where the nub of the issue is. He opposes Glass-Steagall because he doesn't want any form of regulation. And I think if you don't have Glass-Steagall, and this is Mr. LaRouche's point, we're going to have either a hyperinflationary bailout process, which will reduce the value of the euro and the dollar to nothing, or we're going to have an implosion of the banking system. Now, the question of what happens if the banking system implodes, in other words, if the Lehman model were spread across to all the banks, I think you'd have chaos unleashed. And so this is an area where if Ron Paul were to come out tomorrow and say, okay, I'm going to include Glass-Steagall, I think we'd support him. Right now, we can't support Obama or Romney. And what I'm doing in the Democratic Party is saying to Democrats, we'd better dump Obama before the Democratic Convention, or the Democratic Party will be wiped out, not just for president, but the House and Senate, because Obama is becoming increasingly unpopular for legitimate reasons. You now have, I don't know if you know this, but there are 5 or 6 senators, Democratic senators up for re-election, who have told Obama not to come into their states, including Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who said not only are they not going to attend the Democratic Convention, but they don't want Obama coming into their states. You have a rebellion on the grassroots of the Democratic Party, but you've got this control by the media, which is essentially saying it's racist. It's opposing Obama because he's black. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, I oppose George Bush for the same reasons I oppose Obama, on this unlimited dictatorial power to the president, the idea of the bailouts. It's the same problem. It has nothing to do with race or religion. It has to do with policy. And I think what we're seeing is Democrats starting to run away from that. My concern on the Republican side is that they're playing this for an electoral victory in November, when, to tell you the truth, Mitt Romney is supported by the same interests. He's getting a lot of money now from Goldman Sachs and
That's right.
Morgan Stanley and so on.
No, absolutely. We're going to get more of the same under Mitt Romney, and everybody who's awake on the Republican side and the Libertarian side recognizes that. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
We're saying let's blow up the process, get Obama out now, and force the Democrats to look deep into their traditions and ask themselves, is this really the tradition that will help working people and that will help the unemployed and that will help businesses? It's clearly not. And if you actually had a serious Democratic candidate, then the Republicans would have to do some adjustment as well, including probably throw Romney out. And I think that'd be the healthiest thing in this country, to have a prolonged debate over the summer and the fall over what is the nature of economics and what is the nature of man, such that human beings can make decisions as representatives of a Republican system that will give us a better future. That's what the debate should be, as opposed to which ideological stance dictated by the banksters are we going to adopt.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to squeeze that debate in between Monday Night Football, Sunday sports. I mean, the fall's a very fun time in America. You know that, Harley. There's no way that people could possibly focus on these issues for. Well, I'm kidding.
But Sean, I know that's the so-called realistic, practical view of the American people, because we've become very stupid because of our practicality and our pursuit of pleasure. But what happens under these kinds of collapse conditions? If you look at Greece, for example, or Spain, where there's 25% official unemployment. Now, in this country, we're closer to 20% than to the so-called 8% figure they keep throwing out.
Yeah.
But what happens when people no longer, if you have this kind of crash, your ATM card won't work, your credit cards won't work, there won't be credit to allow the local supermarket to ship in foods. The supermarket shelves will be bare. We're really facing something that Americans have not had to face since the days of the last Depression, of shortages, of breakdowns. And so I think under these circumstances, we can catch the attention of enough people so that before this happens, we can make an adjustment, of course. But that has to include speaking plainly about the two designated nominees for the two parties, that neither of them represent a solution. They're controlled by the people who created the problem.
That's right. Let me circle back and ask you, though. You'd said that Ron Paul doesn't support the re-implementation of Glass-Steagall. Isn't it true that Ron Paul did vote against the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act? I mean, I think he supported Glass-Steagall.
Well, I don't know what he did in 1999. He may well have opposed the repeal. But I know that when he was asked recently, he said that he's opposed to going back to Glass-Steagall. Now, he's also opposed to Dodd-Frank, which unfortunately too many people voted for. But if people can talk to him, and I'm serious, if he were to come out and say, okay, let's get Glass-Steagall, I think Mr. LaRouche would be much more open to backing him.
Yeah, and boy, what a sea change that could be to get your organization, too, on board with this Ron Paul revolution. It's a very real revolution, and I just always hate to see anybody malign it. Not that you have, Harley, or the LaRouche organization, but others have, and then there's been this issue with Rand Paul endorsing Mitt Romney, which has been just a disaster.
But you see, Sean, there is a basis for fighting on principle among people who have a common goal. The common goal we share. And by the way, I think this is shared generally with people who consider themselves Tea Party and people who consider themselves Occupy Wall Street, is that we cannot allow 1 or 2% of the elite of this country to control 90% of the finances. We can't allow that.
That's right.
And the question of how you bring that under control is something that can be debated. But that if someone is going to say, well, maybe Obama in his second term will do X, Y, and Z, because he's now talking against Wall Street, even as he's going to Wall Street financiers for backing. Or Romney talks about how he's going to get small business going when his whole record is to support the monopolies. So I think if we have people who have the common ground of opposing such atrocities as the health care bill, the bailouts, the presidential authority to send troops to blow up countries and kill American men and women. Those are common principles that we share, opposition to those policies. We can then debate how to do it. But I think the debate on Glass-Steagall is clear, and I'd like to see people who are supporters of Ron Paul to join us to get this implemented, because this is the only way to stop the bailouts, which I know the supporters of Ron Paul's presidential campaign would like to do.
Absolutely. Harley, you've been extremely generous with your time. I know that you're headed to Europe soon on behalf of the LaRouche organization. What is it that you hope to accomplish there? The situation is dire. Tell us what your plans are.
Well, we have an organization in Europe that for the last 3 years has been saying that the euro is no longer going to work, that it's actually broken down, the system won't function. And our proposal is you go back to the pre-euro conditions. You get rid of the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, and you go back to national sovereignty. You know, nations like Germany, Italy, Spain, France, they have physical production. But what they've done in a very short period of time is put the control of the money system in their countries into the hands of bureaucrats in Brussels who are operating on behalf of these City of London banks. And, you know, Deutsche Bank, which used to be a German bank, is now headquartered in London. BNP Paribas, the biggest bank in France, is controlled by its London office. And so you have a Europe of the bankers as opposed to the original idea of de Gaulle and Adenauer of a Europe, a unified Europe of the nation states. And so our fight is to convince governments that they should swallow the deflation that's going to occur by dumping the euro in the short term and going back to investing in their own economies. Right now, nations of Europe can't invest in their own economies. Italy, for example, was just forced to participate in the loan to the Spanish banks. So the government of Italy had to come up with 19 billion euros that they don't have by selling bonds at 6.2% to loan money for which they'll get a 3% return, at a point in which Italy is about to go into the tank and need a bailout itself. Italy's going to need 1.9 trillion euros as opposed to Greece, which only needed 300 billion. When I say only, those are relative terms. So what we're saying to the nations of Europe is, again, go back to the pre-Euro treaty in 1999-2000. Go back to the Deutschmark, the Lira, the franc, and then you can have bilateral and multilateral negotiations on trade, but also get rid of this globalization, this free trade, which is really just an excuse for shutting down industry in the advanced sector and taking up, as you said, serf labor or slave labor from the poorer countries to substitute through imports what we no longer produce. That whole model of the past 40 years has proven to be an utter catastrophe, a disaster. So we're not turning back the clock. We're picking up aspects of a model that actually worked better, and then we can reform it for the future. But the model we have now is not going to work, and that includes the euro.
In your view, real briefly, in your view, do you see the fall of this euro experiment also being the death nail in the plans for world governance or a one world government? Do the elite plans fall apart if they can't keep Europe stitched together?
Well, I think it's proven very conclusively that that idea is a non-starter unless you have compliant populations which are willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of the world government. So I think any idea that you can go to a global currency arrangement of a euro, yen, dollar zone or something like that is absurd. Nations have to have the sovereignty to determine what they're going to do and not have to bow to bureaucrats who have no interest in the lives of the people of an individual nation.
Okay, I'm going to let you go because I know that your time is so valuable and you've given us so much of it. Any final words for the audience as it relates to how to protect themselves from this catastrophe that may not be able to be stopped?
Well, I think we have to do everything we can to stop it. And I know Mr. LaRouche is 90 years old. He's optimistic. What we've seen in the last days with the scandals that are emerging around the Obama administration is that people are now beginning to ask themselves, should we go down with Obama or should we consider an alternative? And I think people have to really fight against the pessimism and despair of those around them and try to rekindle this sense of the spirit of the Founding Fathers who took on the greatest empire in the world with literally nothing. And yet, look what we created in this country. So we're facing a crisis that's much bigger in scope, but we should have learned something from the 250-year history of the American Republic. And so I would say that if people approach things with that kind of optimism, and let me add one other thing, go to our website, LaRouchePAC.com, where we have constantly putting updates on news stories, but also longer features on what is the American system, what is the science that's being suppressed by the Obama administration right now. What are the potential ways out? So LaRouchePAC.com, and as you and I have discussed, people can make up their own minds if they like it or not, if they find value in what we're saying. I have enough confidence to know that your listeners are looking for truth, and I think they'll find some things on our website that will help them get there.
Well, absolutely, and one of the things that I love about what you guys are doing, Harley, is that you are trying very, very hard to provide real solutions, not just constantly talking about the catastrophe and the problems we're facing. You're trying very, very hard to orchestrate and provide solutions, and for that I'm grateful. And it's just so refreshing to be on a call and to see these 2 and 3 and 4, and to see people coming together in the fashion I always like to say it's humanity versus the banksters at this point, and I think humanity is finally waking up. Can't thank you enough for your time, Harley.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And let me just say on that, look, there are more of us than there are of them. It's just that we're not organized properly, and we've lost leadership. But I think this is our time coming up.
I think it's our time too, and I think together we can make it happen. Harley Schlanger, national spokesperson for the LaRouche organization. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure, Sean.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. I'm glad you called.
Okay, thanks, Harley. Have a great day.
Okay, Sean.
Bye.
Sure. Bye.
Well, that's it, guys. As always, thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks for visiting sgtreport.com for all the latest. Good night.